uh, countries that claim to be Islamic. The first one is the Constitution of the Republic of Iran from the Iranian website. The Islamic Republic is a system based on belief in one God, as stated in the phrase, "There is no God except you," His exclusive sovereignty and right to legislate, and the necessity of submission to His commands. Who's the legislator here? God. Right. Okay. Now, but that's Iran. We all know they're crazy, right? Okay. No offense to any Iranians in the room. But it was a revolutionary constitution, right? You should read the whole long preamble. It's incredibly long. But how about Pakistan, an American ally, not a member of the Axis of Evil? Here's how the Pakistani constitution begins. Whereas sovereignty over the entire universe belongs to Almighty God alone, and the authority to be exercised by the people of Pakistan is within the limits prescribed by Him as a sacred trust, and whereas it is the will of the people of Pakistan to establish such an order, etc. Now, these two constitutions could not be more different from the American Constitution. They begin by recognizing the absolute sovereignty of God, God as a lawmaker. Okay? Now, whether that's a good way to start a constitution of a modern state, that's another political discussion, but I think you can see the distinction between your starting point being, we the people will make the laws, and God will make the laws, and we will follow them, right? It's a big difference. That's the difference in worldview that I'm talking about, and it pops up in a number of other kinds of ways, and I think that's why we have to have dialogue. We have to talk about where laws come from, how they're generated out of human society. Now, I'm going to come to this again in a minute, but I want to now talk about, since I've sketched briefly this difference in worldview, and I've given you an example. One starts with God and God's sovereignty. One starts with people and their sovereignty, right? And pretty much God's out of the picture, right? Okay, I want to talk about three specific issues that are problematic and which I think can lead to dialogue. The first is the question of religion and politics, right? Now, that's a big issue in the United States, even if you were to take all the Muslims out. Okay, we're not exactly on one page, we Americans, on religion and politics. But there are a few things which, regardless of how these discussions take place, tend to be the same, okay? And first is the use of the word religion. It's the use of the word religion. Let me explain what I mean. America, until 1910 or maybe even by 1920, the United States of America was an almost entirely Protestant nation. Roman Catholics became significant in American politics only with the great migration of Irish Catholics and Italian Catholics at the end of the 19th and early 20th century. So a lot of the American ethos is formed by Protestantism, okay? And part of that ethos of Protestantism is that religion is bad and faith is good, okay? Right? Faith is personal. That's me and God. That's good. Religion is all those organized people wearing funny robes and telling me what to do. That's bad, okay? Actually, that particular idea that religion is bad and maybe even evil and that faith is good was one consequence of probably the greatest and most influential Protestant theologian of the 20th century, Karl Barth, who said with great conviction that religion is one of the worst things in the world. Now, bear in mind, Karl Barth was writing this at a time that the Christian churches in Europe had aligned themselves with Nazism. So when Barth said religion bad, what he means is that kind of organized religion that can be manipulated by the state for evil. Personal faith is good. Okay? Now, by the way, for that reason, okay, part of what the separation of church and state means in the American Constitution is that religion has no rights in the United States. Religious people have rights, right? The right to freedom of religion is not a right accorded to religion, it's a right accorded to individuals. Religion has no rights. That's why Americans say bad things about all kinds of religion all the time, because religion has no rights. It's not a person, right? Now, in most of the Muslim world, religion has rights, right? You shouldn't humiliate a religion. You shouldn't insult a religion, any religion, not just Islam, right? But in the U.S. ethos, religion is probably bad, possibly evil. It certainly has no rights. Individual religious people have rights. Okay? Now that leads to some problems. By the way, some interesting examples of this. This is one reason when John Kennedy was elected president, there was a lot of controversy. It was felt that as a Catholic, he might succumb to religious authority of the Pope, right? Instead of representing the American people, he would represent a supreme religious authority. We found that question arising again because a bishop in Massachusetts has said that he will not serve the Eucharist to Catholic politicians who oppose his policies. That's enormously controversial. That's a religious authority telling an individual how they have to vote. Americans don't like that, okay? We have a tendency to not like religion, we're suspicious of it, and we're especially suspicious of religious authority. Now, so faith is good, religion is bad. For most Muslims, all the Muslims I've ever met anyway, faith is good, but religion is also good and in fact dead necessary. You can't be faithful without religion. And of course the Quran says, I've given you the best religion, din, right? So how can it be bad if you've been big in good religion? But just bear in mind, there's language problem. Here's where the language problem is, right? That's why you see interreligious dialogue and interfaith dialogue. Interfaith dialogue sounds really good to Christian Protestants. Yeah, let's talk about our faith. Interreligious dialogue? Bunch of men in robes talking to each other about dogma and other things that we don't like. You see the difference? Okay. Now, if we realize this, then I think we can begin to have a real dialogue about the role of religion, faith, and politics in American society, just by becoming clear about this. I have a friend, a Muslim friend in Dallas, who often gives presentations to Christian groups, and I said, you really ought to just drop the word religion and use way of life to translate this word din. Because so many Protestants have a negative attitude towards just the word religion. If you say way of life, a way of life is a good thing. We all need a way of life, right? We all need structure, authority, all that. Religion, don't want it, okay? We can have this kind of dialogue. And by the way, we can then begin to see that underlying this question of religion and politics in American society and the reason it's so contested is because there really are some issues at stake that are quite big. Can you be a person of faith without having a religious community to be faithful in, to guide you and help you, right? Can you express your personal faith in a political way, right, and not also call upon the power of an organized religious group to reflect your political will, right? I mean, it's well worth asking why it is so perfectly acceptable that an American worker would join into a union that represents his political views, and then the union would put money into politics, right? Or if you're like me and you're within 15 years of retirement and you're worried about health, you join the American Association of Retired Persons. So even if you're not retired, you get a 10% discount at the movie theater. But yeah, you join the AARP because they represent your concerns and views, but they clump together so they can represent them better to cap. That's okay, right? Why is that okay and it's not okay for people who have religious faith views to clump together and have a religious lobby? Why? Well, it's because of a suspicion of religion. But in fact, it's a big question in American society that really belongs to all of us. Can you be faithful without being religious? A lot of people would say, no, maybe not. Even some good Protestants that are suspicious of religion would say you kind of have to have a community, structure, fellow persons, and that you can express your faith through that community in a political and community way. Why not? But you got to see what the problem is before you can talk at that level. So that's the first thing, and that's why dialogue is so important, that recognizes where the issue is. Now the second thing that is a big issue, and I'm being very bold here to take on these things, I hope you're not offended, is the issue of social structures and divine law.